Ramirez. Welcome to the show. I'm delighted to finally have you here. We finally got here.
Awesome. I am so excited as well, Alex. I'm excited to be here and have the chance to chat with you this morning.
Oh, you're so nice. You're so nice. That's so nice. Nobody's ever said that. Tell me, like I start every episode the same way, or at least I've evolved it to become a kind of similar way now. Where I ask my guests to like introduce themselves, tell me a bit about yourself, who you are and where you came from. I think it sounds much better coming from you than it does from me. So, and it helps warm up the whole conversation. So you want to tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I will default to kind of what I do right now, but I will tell you that is, I think as leaders, we have a tendency to kind of default to the title that's on our business card, but we are so much more than that. And so let me just start there as against my better judgment to say that currently I work as the Vice President of Operations for Diversified Restaurant Group. But as I just said, we are so much more than that. And the reality is that whether we're moms or dads or sisters or brothers, I have a fantastic family. I've got a wonderful husband I met at 15 years old, and
Wow.
and I'm not 15 today, believe it or not. And we have two fantastic kids, but we started both of us actually started our lives in Southwest Kansas in a place called Garden City, Kansas. And so not a ton of people know where that's at. And if you can just think of the Wizard of Oz and then you think of Dodge City. So the Wizard of Oz is in is in Liberal, Kansas. And then Dodge City is actually the home of Boot Hill. So the great wild, wild west, if you will. And
All right.
yeah, so the town we grew up in was Garden City, which was famously known for feedlots. So not quite as impressive as those other two places. And if you get up in the mornings, I remember as a kid getting up in the mornings, and if the wind was blowing just right, you didn't necessarily want to be in that direction. My dad used to say, you know what that smell is, Kara? That's the smell of money. So,
Yeah.
a little bit more about me. My family and I have relocated kind of throughout the country, and I've spent the lion's share of my career in what you would call casual dining. And this is kind of my first opportunity to really join the fast casual or the fast food segment of the industry. And I just couldn't be more excited. So learning a lot, trying to drink from a fire hose, if you will, but certainly getting my feet under me for sure. So a little bit about me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I mean, you're quite a seasoned exec though. And I think you're kind of very humble in the sense that like you had an incredible career. Like you spent the guts of 2 decades at Darden, and then you were at Red Lobster as well. So like, I mean, you've rubbed shoulders with the best and learned from the best as well.
That's true. And I've been incredibly fortunate in my career to do exactly that and work for some incredible leaders and meet some incredible executives. And really, I would tell you that what I've found to be true, that they're incredibly, the folks that I've run across have been incredibly grateful and really just authentic, genuine, and willing to kind of share their knowledge to help me grow as an individual, which in turn, I've tried to emulate those behaviors as well. But as you said, I have spent the lion's share of my career, or the a couple of decades within the casual dining segment, and really just started I would tell you, I started as a restaurant manager. I became a general manager of a location, became an area manager, or what we call the director of operations, where you had kind of a multi-unit span of control. Went on to take on the vice president level. And then really the truth is, Alex, if I can be candid with you, as I was leaving the casual dining industry and looking for something a little bit new, I had a person in our field say to me, Carrie, you're kind of a one-trick pony. And I went, ooh, that's painful. And they said, well, you've just been in casual dining. And really, if you want to really show what you've got, you're going to have to expand and get out into the industry. And at the time, as I said, it was a little bit painful to hear, but that individual was incredibly right. And what I've learned is that it really doesn't matter, Alex, what segment of the industry you're working for, whether you're selling batteries or mortgage loans, or you're working for Taco Bell or you're working for Red Lobster. It's really all the same, right? You got to have a great product. You got to really inspire people, and you got to get people to want to it's about growing the top line, growing the bottom line, and kind of managing the middle. And it doesn't really matter what brand you work for. It's kind of all the same.
That's kind of an insanely insightful kind of point, because I mean that really resonates with me in the sense that like my career has been like consulting, credit cards, online education, like business financing, and now in HR, recruitment, SaaS, if you would like to call it that way. You know what I mean? And it's like all the thing. I feel like it's very much like my job is to get people to buy it.
Right.
I mean? And it's like it doesn't really kind of matter. Like the fundamentals exist. Like why do people buy it? Because you want to solve a problem for somebody. So it's like because of that, it doesn't really affect me. Like I'm not one of these like I got to be in this industry the whole way, like the whole kind of thing. It's like, no, it's like, I guess like marketing is my industry as opposed to the vertical that the business finds itself within. Right. And it's interesting for you to say that, because I was going to ask you like, why fast casual like a year ago? Like what was sort of like your impetus? Like was there something in the market? Was there just the opportunity? Like why was the one trick pony just create a chip on your shoulder? Like why?
Yeah, well, again, I'm not sure that not having gotten that candid feedback from that individual, I'm not sure I would have. I'm not sure that I would have expanded the way that I needed to kind of grow within the organization, or not within the entire industry. But you say, well, what was it? And there's a little bit of me that I was constantly watching this segment of the industry, and I would constantly see like. You have this fast food, quick service kind of, just as people are growing and the economy is changing and millennials are coming up, and you say, man, there's something to that where that continues to grow, and I think people's desires for what they're getting has been changing and evolving. And so 30 years ago, 20 years ago, people wanted this family dining experience where they could actually go in and sit and really communicate with each other. And what you learn is that they still want that. They just want it a little bit differently, which seems to be kind of this other side of the industry where people, at least for the younger generation, seem to be flocking towards, where they're saying, hey, I want to do that, but I want to do it a little bit differently maybe than what I used to do it with mom and dad or grandma and grandpa. So I would say that probably worked into that a little bit. And then, again, your workforce is constantly changing. And so there's that element as well where you say, listen, you're not only getting it from the clientele or the customers or consumers, whatever you want to call them, but you're also getting it from your internal workforce who's really saying, hey, how can we do this differently? And I've always said the best ideas come from the field, the people that are working closest with the product every single day. And the best leaders really sit and listen to what their employees are saying to them, because they're the ones who have it figured out. They're the ones saying, hey, if we just did it a little bit differently, I think we'd be so much more successful at really bringing this thing to life. So it's a combination, Alex, to be honest.
And like you're alluding to like a change in sort of consumer demand, like a generational change in demand where younger buyers of food, basically younger restaurant goers, are looking for like a kind of different experience, and fast casual kind of falls into that. What are the kind of elements within fast casual that you see are like different than say what went before like 20 years ago that you're seeing in the category now?
Well, again, as I said, I don't know that I'm seeing there's innovation in kind of the food process, but it's really about valuing people's time a little bit differently. And so what I'm not trying to suggest is that in every segment of the hospitality industry, there's not, the understanding that we need to really value people's time. But I would tell you that within the quick service model, if you will, there's constant innovation in saying, how can we do this really at the guest request? Like, how can we really make this convenient on them? And so I think about just a recent, I want to call it a conference, but it was there was a different name for it. But we actually went and it was more about really thinking, all right, innovation. How do we grab seconds off of people's time? And so, I talk about the casual dining, or the fine dining, if you will. And there was always a focus on it, but it was always on dollars and minutes. And I would tell you here, it's about pennies and seconds in the quick service industry. And so it's really about, how do you save seconds? How do you reduce pennies? And so there's a little bit of difference there, but that's not to say that it's not really a focus for everybody who's in any business. People want their time. Like the days of trying to get something through snail mail. I don't know the last time you got something of value, with a stamp on it sent to you. It's, what do? We do email. And if we don't get a text message right back, like that's the economy that we live in. It's immediate. And if we don't get it immediately, if we go back to the days of AOL where you're listening to the beep, it's like that's unheard of for us. It has to be immediate. Right there, the email's got to come through, the response has got to come through, and that's just the world that we live in today. And that, whatever business we're in has to match that, or else we'll get lost in the shuffle.
It's interesting, and I love the phrase "seconds and cents." By the way, I think that captures exactly what it is. But like with an emphasis on, say, the cents, like there are multiple, I suppose, fast casual FSRs, like QSRs out there that are kind of, their prices are increasing, and they're kind of getting caught out on Twitter, and they're kind of going viral for their prices. And I'm not going to necessarily name names of certain ones, but like, exactly what I'm alluding to. And certain CEOs in their publicly traded notes talking about the type of consumer changing because they literally cannot afford that. Do you see like a shift happening as well in sort of like the demographic of people who are even kind of coming into fast casual now, in the sense that like people are being priced out, or new types of people are being priced in?
Yeah, that's a good question, Alex. And I think that's a real, let's just call it an issue. I think it's a real challenge or obstacle for any business today. And, there's kind of the macro pressures that come into play there, that all companies, no matter what business they're in, are having to consider. I would tell you that I feel very fortunate to work for the organization that I work for, because they're very much aware of that, and saying, hey, just recently rolling out a value menu and saying, we have to be sensitive to that. We know that's an issue. And by the way, all these businesses that we're talking about, they're for-profit businesses. And I think we have to remind people that profit's not a negative word. If you want to be a nonprofit, that's a whole different avenue. But so I think companies in general are trying to figure out, in this new world that we're living in, that seems to be rapidly changing, how do we stay really relevant? How do we not price ourselves out of the market? And what can we do? Stop focusing on what we can't do, but let's focus on what we can do. How can we deliver, this great experience to you that's fast, that's on your time schedule, but do it in a way that you can afford to come back and see us time and time again? Because I think that's going to be the true differentiator as we move forward. And we're mitigating costs, Alex. You think about just things that are outside the restaurant control. You still have to pay those things. I mean, California's, getting ready to pass the minimum wage that they are. And those are real obstacles that businesses just have to figure out. And I will tell you that, again, I feel very fortunate to work for an organization that's ahead of that versus waiting until we have to react to it.
Okay, well, this is I'm glad you brought that up as opposed to me, because I feel like it's quite a very sensitive question, that fast act in California. But I'd be curious your take on it in terms of what do you think its impact is kind of going to have? Like, nobody knows what's going to happen. Like, personally, I think there's going to be mutation in the hiring market for talent. I don't know what it's going to do, but like, if people are working in non-restaurants for X dollars an hour, but restaurants have to give $20 an hour or something, whatever the number is, that like, are people just going to leave jobs to go to higher paying places? And thus there's a whole thing. I'm just curious. I'd be curious your take on the mutation that is about to that California is about to experience, and your take on California as a market.
Yeah. So the truth is I don't know, I, like everybody, I don't know. And I'm running Kansas City. And so, that I'm sitting back saying, hey, the people smarter than I am, but, greater minds than mine are figuring all this out. And so I think it would be a miss on my part if I even tried to speculate at this point, because That's not the situation we're facing right now in Kansas
Yeah.
City. And so what I know is that, we'll be able to grab some learnings and understand how to make the business more efficient
Yeah.
as we move forward.
Well, I think the word efficiency is key there, because like one of the things I think about hospitality a lot is how resilient hospitality is. Restaurants, very, very resilient. Hospitality survived and had to go through almost like revolution as opposed to evolution, kicking and screaming out of COVID, incredibly tough time for people. And I think the same when something like fast acting California, to your point about like, it's going to be a type of efficiency. I think like clearly like there are going to be major losers and major winners, just like in COVID, that people will kind of like struggle, but ultimately people will have to figure out new innovative ways, especially with their P&L, to offset these kinds of costs. Because I think about this a lot, like the two major kind of costs for any restaurant are like humans, number one, and commodities, number two. And so, if you were dealing with inflation and like last year, spike of avocados, and you sell a lot of avocados, all of a sudden your prices through the roof. So like, I'm curious with you, what kind of challenges, I mean, I know you're like Kansas specific, Kansas focused, but if you were looking from, say, your role here, what are sort of your kind of large challenges that you feel like you're going to face for, say, the rest of the year into 2025?
Well, I think the biggest things that I foresee us just in the industry kind of facing, and probably the thing that keeps me up at night is the unknown, right? To say, listen, I can work on operations and make sure that we're doing the right things within the restaurant, but the answer is the stuff that's coming that I don't know about. It is probably the thing that makes me most cautious, if you will. You talk about COVID and the resiliency of really the hospitality industry, and I think what that signifies, at least to me, is that the importance of sure, when COVID rolled out and everybody started, going to the grocery store and sanitizing every box that came
I
home.
never did that.
You never did that. And they would cook for themselves. And I think what you realized in the industry is that people crave that whole concept of going out and getting prepared food. And so no matter how they do it, whatever, vehicle they use or avenue they use to kind of do that, I would tell you that it proved to me that people have a strong desire for the service that we offer in the hospitality industry. And so just to circle back with regard to, say, the resiliency, whether it's being brought to you or you're doing it through quick service, and whatever it is that you're doing, I think what that proves to me is that people have a strong desire to want that from our industry. So that actually gives me hope that we've still got a very strong future ahead of us. But the thing that makes me nervous is the stuff I don't know about, that I can't predict.
It's funny you say the things that keep you up are the unknowns. I mean, like, oh my God, right. The anxiety.
Right.
The anxiety.
Yeah.
Surely there are obviously other things like, oh my God, our hiring goal is we're not at the number we need, or our churn, or there's got to be actual numbers in there or something as well that does kind of worry you as well. Like the unknown is like, I'm anxious for you that the unknown is what keeps you up at night,
Yeah. And so, I think because I say the unknown, because the things that I know about, Alex, we can figure out how to control. And so things, I think you're aware that in our earlier conversations with DRG, this is kind of our year of the GM. And, you talk about hiring goals and the importance of culture, really, that you say, I guess I consider that a little bit of a less unknown, because you say, how do you hit your hiring goals? How do you find the people? You know what? The separation between a great restaurant and an average or below average restaurant really centers on the culture that's created within the restaurant. And we know that. And so that's really the importance as to why we're trying to get ahead of all of that and say, how do we empower general managers differently, better equip them, provide them what they need so that they can go out and create this really great culture that people want to stay at. You probably have heard it throughout these many conversations you've had. Money is not always the biggest driver. Like, you can pay somebody a lot of money and treat them very poorly, And guess what? They're not going to stick around. They're going to go where they feel that it's a great culture, that their boss cares about them, that they can provide a living for their family, and that the culture just matters. And it's established by the general manager.
See, I love that we have kind of naturally come into this, because this is an area that I really want to tap into, given that you have your own personal experience in it. And then also just, I think, for operations leaders in restaurants, in restaurant groups, I'm always curious your take on the GM. Like, tell me about how the GM has like evolved, like the role of the GM, like over say the last 5 years, even. So basically since COVID, how has the role of the GM changed now? What are the expectations that you put on your GMs, and how do you help them succeed?
Yeah. And so a little bit of a convoluted answer, I will tell you, Alex, because I'm not sure that when I was a general manager compared to what I'm looking for with great general managers who create great culture has necessarily changed in the last 5 years. It has a little bit because the emphasis has changed with the talent pool. So, you'd look pre-COVID, was it a little easier because you had a larger talent pool? Well, that tends to go up with unemployment rates or down or different things. But again, I will tell you, in my history, my experience is that people work for people, and people leave for poor leadership, quite honestly. And so even when I've seen people that have, maybe they've gone on to do something else, they stick around within the great cultures. They may stick around 1 or 2 days a week just because they enjoy that. Even if they've gone on and graduated and they're doing something that they want to do, when it's a great culture, they stick around. And when it's a poor culture, they get the heck out of there very, very quickly. There's 2 things that I've really learned with regard to culture. Is the first one is you can't force culture, and culture fights back. And what I mean by that is that you can't just go out there and come up with all these different slogans or, really creative terms and go, well, you can't force that culture to come into play. It's the daily actions, the daily disciplines that the general manager, exhibits within the restaurant that actually establish that culture. And then I would tell you that the second part of that is that culture fights back, is that, listen, people they revert back to kind of behaviors that they've known in the past. And so those things kind of have a tendency, especially in a turnaround situation or in the beginnings of a relationship building kind of culture establishing environment, those bad behaviors tend to surface back up sometimes. And it's very important that the general manager really affirms the right things to do, or discourages, without sweeping it under the rug, but kind of has those immediate crucial conversations, which aren't fun, but just simply to say, hey, let's just realign here. Because if they don't, then it gets away from them, and it kind of gets out of hand pretty quickly.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of pressure on the GM.
There is.
I mean, in the sense that like the make or break of the whole place.
Right.
And so when you look at, say, GMs, how do you think about the sort of motivation for the GM to do well, and sort of like compensating that effort? Like, is there, and I don't mean just in terms of like how much you pay them. I mean, like in the sense, like, how do you compensate them for their effort beyond simply just like, here's your salary and away you go? Like, do you guys like think about like, equity, profit sharing, locations, that kind of stuff, for like, making them feel like an owner? Like, how do you think of, again, creating like an aligned incentives, that kind of thing? I'm always curious for like large orgs, how they think about that.
Yeah. And so, yes, there are compensation programs above and beyond kind of the salary. And, and so that is always top of mind for, the executive team, and certainly for our HR partners, and how do we create the most lucrative programs that reward the behaviors that we want. But you're 100% right. What's sitting on the shoulders of our general managers is and I used to say it again, because I was a general manager, you're getting, it's like you've got all these disciplines that kind of filter into one job, and that sits on the shoulder of the general manager. So making sure that they're taking great care of the employees and the guests, and running a safe restaurant. And so I think you hit it on the head when you said, how do you make them feel like an owner? How do you make them feel like they can run it like they own it? And this constant kind of engagement from their boss that says, hey, are you feeling fulfilled here? what do you need? How can I really help contribute to what you've got going on here? Versus, we've probably all worked for leaders in the past that tend to ignore us. They don't, it's like, maybe you're doing well and they're like, hey, I got bigger fish to fry, or fire to put out over here. And really the importance of just saying, hey, the above store leader, the multi-unit leader, just really spending kind of that one-on-one time to say, Alex, are you getting everything you want? What do you want to do with your career? How can I continue to invest in you? You may find out that they're doing exactly what they want, but you may find out they have a desire to grow and do more, which gives you an opportunity to really talk about career development and different things. And you may find out it's that they have a love for being involved in the community. Like, there's just so much that you can't assume, but it just requires just getting in and having that one-on-one conversation and being incredibly honest with somebody to say, you know what, right now, Alex, that, you may have the desire to do that. Let's figure out how we can get you there. And which is going to require a little bit of change maybe on your part and some of the stuff you're doing. And it's going to require that I do some things differently for you as well. But it is very important that we, that we're constantly thinking about those equity packages and how do we kind of empower our general managers to really feel like they're just not showing up to work and punching a clock, but that they're owning the business.
Totally. I mean, it's interesting because, like, when I talk to people about GMs, I feel like, there's such a burden on them beyond simply running a good and safe restaurant, like, as in to be like one with the P&L and understand the numbers, one with the data, like the data expectations now, and like being able to understand what's inside like the POS, to be able to understand demand of the restaurant, how to staff appropriately with data, like all net new skills. Like somebody was telling me before, years ago, there used to be like a book that people would get like on a Monday or Tuesday that would tell them what happened over the weekend. So like you would plan, but you would do it like, I mean, obviously it's old school, whereas now like you just open your computer and you can see the exact data and look at this week over week over week and build trends and see like how things are performing and like manage that like appropriately. It's like I feel like they have become an incredibly even more valued like part of the restaurant, especially like post-COVID, I think, because like there's a lack of sort of like talent options available within the industry as a whole. So if you have good ones, that it's almost like you have to like really empower them to like really like kind of make them feel like they're wanted to like stay. Because to your point, it's not about a couple of grand, like changing a job, GM over here, GM over here. Like I hear that from every single person I have on this pod. It's like, and so your opinion is very the same. It's like people are not going to leave for a couple of grand. You know what I mean? And that shows how valuable sort of culture is. But like when you think about culture, then you meant like, what are sort of like practical steps? Because I know you're going to write a book on this very topic. And so for everybody here, she has 2 books. I'll let Cara speak to what they are, but there's a 3rd book that you're now noodling on, which is about culture. So I'm curious, how you think about the application of culture within like a restaurant business and like sort of like kind of high level thoughts you have on that.
Yeah. So, I would tell you kind of with regard to what I'm currently writing, and I was sharing with you before we got on here that it was a very relevant topic because I kind of pulled it back up and realized it was all about culture and the importance of culture that's happening. And I would tell you that culture always wins. It always trumps anything and everything that you can do or that you can think about. And when people have great culture within their restaurant or within any business that they're running, truthfully, it always shines. And so, it kind of some high level thoughts on that would be, as I shared, while we can't always control what happens to us, we can certainly control how we respond to that. And as you said, as a general manager, there's a lot coming at them. There is so much coming at them. And it feels like, I would say specifically in the hospitality industry, we're kind of taught to pick out what's wrong, right? And it's a new skill where we have to train people. Hey, let's start with what's right. Let's start identifying what we see that's going really well to make sure that everybody understands how incredibly successful they are. And then let's do the job that we're hired to do and to pick out the things that can only make us better and stronger. to run the business. But the reality is that if nobody gets up every single day and says, I really want to suck at my job, like, how can I get up and screw this thing up? Everybody comes in and says, how can I be better? How can I be stronger? And when you've got a bad leader in your restaurant, Alex, or whatever business you're running, I think we have a tendency sometimes to say, like, well, I know Alex and he's my GM, and so let me see if I can help him. But the thing that I've always tried to remind myself and everyone else that I've worked with is, when you go into a building and you've got all these people reporting into Alex, if Alex isn't a great leader, every time you walk in, every employee is standing there going, when is she going to do something about this guy? Like, when she's the person who can make a difference for us and make our lives kind of better here, when is she going to do it? But I don't know that we always consider that option, because, again, we get so stuck on Alex and saying, hey, I've got a relationship with him, and we kind of forego the responsibility that we have to really everybody else who's going home to their families and going, man, it was another lousy day. Oh, and they're going, why doesn't somebody do something? And they say, I don't know. So, again, just the importance of remembering that we are leaders for everyone, not just one person.
Are we too over reliant on the GM for culture, in the sense that, like, how do we kind of create like almost like a self-reliant type of culture within a restaurant as well? Like, I think, like, because you have to identify a great GM,
right,
and see that they need to tick a bunch of boxes. Like, they need to understand data, they need to understand the P&L, they need to be, first and foremost, an amazing people person. So you have to find them. But then what makes a great people person is a bunch of, like, intangible things. And so are we very reliant on the restaurant GM itself to, like, basically be responsible solely for the culture in an organization, do you think?
Well, I think we certainly can be. I think that's a risk that we sometimes run, where we put it all on one person, and the best leaders figure out kind of where they fit in. And my husband always has this clever little thing he says to me when I get a little bit too much on a high horse, if you will. And he says, it's not all about you, Kara. And I say, well, okay, thank you for reminding me of that. But what he's saying is really relevant, because really the best leaders understand where they need to insert themselves, and they have to be comfortable enough to step out of the picture and empower their own people to really create that culture that you're talking about. So it's not all on their shoulders. And so let me give you an example. I think when you're trying to create a really strong team, to say, it's not imperative that the general manager has all the answers. And sometimes people think, like, I got to know everything, I got to have the best solution. And again, you say, what kind of a great environment will you create when you just say, hey, you're the bartender, you make these drinks, like, what's your solution to this problem that we're facing to reduce alcohol costs or to better service the clients that come in? And so now what's happened is, now I may be the bartender, but now I feel really empowered to make some changes. And I now feel like I've got ownership, which makes your job as a general manager even that much better and that much stronger. The other thing too is, I would say sometimes leaders hang on a little bit too long, where they say, listen, and I think back to one time when I was a general manager, it was in Augusta, Georgia. And I remember saying, like, I was asked to take on a new responsibility. And so, people were questioning the decision, because I was leaving a really great environment and going to a not so great environment. And I remember my response at one point was to say, beyond all of the explanation that I had given as to why I was going, which all made a lot of sense to me at the time. But I also said, the other thing too, is I've given this team everything I have, and they deserve to have somebody come in behind me who has skills that I don't have to take them to the next level. And so that's not easy to do, right, Alex? It's not easy to go to a difficult spot. And it's not easy to admit, to say, you know what, somebody's going to be able to give them and make them better than what I could do.
Yeah, and I think that's fair, but I think that's also, like, you have a very high degree of empathy, and more specifically to that example, like, humility, to be able to admit that to oneself as well. Because, like, there's also the case of, like, people are like, like some cost fallacy to an experience like that, where it's like, I'm so far in, I'm just going down with it, or I'm going to figure it all out. But I guess that's what like separates kind of like leaders, I guess, as well, is being able to take a step back, take a breath, and kind of observe. Because as a leader, your job is to observe and basically offer advice and unlock the employees below you. I think, one of the things I find interesting just about leadership in general, especially in hospitality, is that we talk a lot about leadership, but it's like empowering people to become leaders is probably like a gap that, say, a lot of corporate America has a lot of focus on this. I guess McKinsey's built $1 billion business off the back of training people to become with leadership training. But like, I think what separates I think one of the trends I definitely feel like I'm hearing, Cara, in doing this podcast, is that because there's like a dearth of like talent in the space, like up and coming talent, because a lot of them just didn't come through because of COVID, that one of the big questions now is like retention of staff. Like, how do we keep people? And the number one kind of thing for keeping people is training. And it's like, how do we train people for more kind of senior positions and design like career programs? Whereas before it was a bit like finger in the air. It's like, that person's good, that person's not. Okay, we'll take this person and we'll put them on the fast track. And it wasn't very formalized. And one of the things I think about with leadership is like, people are born, like Napoleon was a born leader, inverted commas, but at the same time, there are certainly like strategies and tactics to be able to empower people to become leaders in a corporate environment. Like, there are practices, norms, habits that you can train in people to become like effective leaders, I should say, so to speak. And I think about that a lot when I think about hospitality, because I'm like, ultimately, I think that's like, I feel like that the professional class of restaurateurs, so to speak, will be falling more and more into this category of really like empowering a type of leadership. Because I think like the days of relying on finding people just like as diamonds in the rough are like over now. I think like the opposite, it's just so expensive to hire and it's so expensive to keep people that like you better invest in the ones you have if you think you can make them, versus it's like, scattergun approach. And I'm curious your take on that. If do you think that I'm like, Alex, you're wildly off base, this is how I do it, or where do you stand on my hot take?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I think that's where this kind of shoulder to shoulder mentality comes into play, that says, listen, I see something in you that you don't maybe see in yourself, but I see what you can become. I see the future you, whereas today you may be looking at kind of what you have today. And so really the onus would be on the leader to take that individual and work shoulder to shoulder with them to say, let me teach you what I do. Let me teach you what the career path could look like. And, we have a tendency as leaders, we have a tendency to really, in my opinion, generalize kind of positive feedback. Hey, everybody did a great job tonight. Everybody's wonderful. But when there's a negative in performance, we're very specific about it. And we've got to reverse that. I don't know that we have to reverse it, but we certainly need to equalize it a little bit to be able to say, hey, listen, let's talk specifically about what you did that was so impressive. Instead of that, you did a great job. It was specifically, man, the way you managed that labor line on your P&L through the wage management, or the way you manage your food costs, or you checked up on vendors. And so specifically to our business in hospitality and managing the P&L, or the way that you really talked to that employee that really bought in the engagement to make them want to stay with us and found solutions to the problems that they were having, to just be very, very specific so that I understand what it is that I'm doing very well. And, kind of one of the things I'm incredibly excited about is with DRG is this kind of women in leadership program that Sierra and many of the other folks on our team have really kind of created and championed by our executives like SG and Todd. It's very important. And so I would tell you that it's needed in the industry. I think one of the first things I said after joining DRG is, I can't believe we're still talking about women in leadership. But, I remember being a young lady in just starting out my career. And I say, man, we really, in my opinion, Alex, should be a little further along. And there've been so many tremendous women who have really forged the way and kind of pioneered the path forward. But I would tell you that personally, sitting on this side of the aisle, I would say we've still got some room to grow, still have some opportunity. And I put a little bit of blame on us. I put a little bit of blame on maybe external factors and say, why is it the way that it is? And I'm excited that we're still having the conversation and that we still have, young leaders, up and coming leaders, as well as tenured seasoned leaders who are all kind of focusing in on this very, very important initiative. But, for me as a leader, I say, hey, I've got to be very almost unapologetic about going out and saying, hey, how do I find someone and really bring them along with me? How do I teach them how to work differently from a gender perspective, and say, hey, these are the things you're going to face. And so while I talk about, some of those things that are outside of our control, when you think about just kind of men versus women, when you're starting out early in your career, I mean, there's just some different obligations. I think that some of the women have come into play where they say, hey, I really want to have a family, but I really want to have a career, and that looks differently from me. And I feel like I have to pick or choose one. And I will tell you, as having had both a successful career and a successful family, I feel like, well, we're not perfect, but, for us, our family works. And we've raised two great kids. I would tell you that what I love to say to young women that are coming up is you don't have to pick. You can have it all. You got to make some sacrifices along the way. You got to make sure that, you're proactive and you're planning, but don't choose and don't forego one so that you can have the other. Have it all.
Yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, and it's incredible that there's like so many of your level of success, still thriving in the industry, and coming on podcast here and mentioning that. I saw 2 weeks ago that the QSR magazine had their women in leadership event as well. Their first one of those as well. And it's interesting, in the sense that you make the point, it's I can't believe we're still talking about it, but I think we should keep talking about it until we're deaf in the ears from it, because I think fundamentally it's an incredibly important conversation. I mean, I've worked in tech and I'm a female CEO, which is fantastic. You know what I mean? But I've worked in tech where it's basically all dudes. And let me tell you, we've had these conversations. I've had a number of, just in terms of even I worked at a company called Lambda School, and we were basically an online school for people quit your job, pay nothing up front, and get pay nothing back until you make over 60-70K a year. So it's basically people who would work in retail or basically people who work in restaurants. They do 6 months with us and they go work at Facebook or Google or whatever. And it was amazing. But we over-indexed the census for African American, Asian Americans. And then in the actual company itself, we basically didn't tick any of those boxes. And it was a real talking point, because it was okay, well, how can we sell a product like this that doesn't reflect the audience of the product that we're buying? And how do we design programs how do we design, say, in our recruitment process, for example, a program that's fair and equitable, as opposed to say, I guess when people talk about say hiring, or they think it's woke or DEI or whichever the phrase, and it's no, how do you actually put people in a position to interview so that everyone gets an opportunity to interview, versus here's the first person you get in, here's a referral, and you hire more and more people that are the same. And I guess the point I'm making is I feel in lots of industries there is that sort of a structural bias in the way that we hire for growing companies. And in hospitality and restaurants, I don't even know what the data is, so I'm actually curious your take, because as a female leader, I mean, do you know how many what's the proportion of women in leadership in, say, restaurant groups in the United States versus, say, men? I'm sure it's not 50-50.
Oh, it's definitely not 50-50, and it's smaller. I will tell you, the higher that you go, the higher that you look, the smaller the number is, and it shouldn't be that way. But I think what you said is very relevant, and I can just reflect on my own career, and the reality is that the higher that I've gone in the organization, I'm always the minority in the group amongst female versus men. And so, that can present its own challenges, Alex, because what you quickly recognize is that you don't think like the rest of the group.
Totally.
So, yeah. And so there's this balancing act that you do a little bit with regard to saying, how do I stifle my comments without stifling my comments, and continuing to recognize my own value and to recognize that people want my perspective. But again, when you're talking about being in, let's say you got 10 people and you're the one in there and you're saying, okay, should I say this? Should I not say this? I will tell you that I remember at one point, there were two of us, and the two, I don't know, 2 versus 20 or something. I don't remember. And we made a pact where we simply said, you know what? We were noticing that maybe I would say something or she would say something and it would get kind of looked over. And then very quickly after that, a man would say the exact same thing or slightly different. Yeah. And the whole room would go, all right. Wow, where did that come from? And the two of us were looking and we said, we're going to make a pact to where when one of us says something, whether we agree with it or not, Alex, we were going to chime in and go, that was a great point. Yeah. Just to highlight the voice. And I don't think there was any malice intent that was involved in that when that was happening, or those times when it happened.
Of course. But that is the pervasive bias that exists, though, and I think, to your point, it's like more representation, more supportive representation. It's very interesting we bring this up because last week I recorded an episode with the CEO of Big B Coffee, and there are like 600-ish locations. I called Mike McFall, and he's written books as well. I get a lot of authors on my podcast lately, but one of the things he said to me was, welcoming all voices to the table and creating opportunities is like a huge thing that he's an advocate for. And he has a phrase called like embracing bias, which is like, to your exact point, if you're in a room of 10 people and 8 of them are guys and 2 of them are girls, it's like the type of experience and points of view are just going to be naturally totally different. You know what I mean? And it's like 8-2 is like, how much harder is it for the 2 women in the room to get their point across when relatable ideas are just not relatable to like sort of men in the room. I wrote something very recently, actually, and so it was basically about like bathrooms and why are lines for women like longer than say for men. Like, why are women's bathrooms designed the way they are in a way that men's bathrooms are designed the way they are? And it's because the vast majority of architects in the United States are all men. And it's likely that there's this sort of like design architecture bias when it comes to bathrooms. And it's interesting in the sense that like you would not think that there are people that are like going out of their way or outwardly sort of like saying, I'm gonna make women take longer in line. But it's like the experience of the design program in and of itself and the architecture like experience is so like male dominated that they have a problem in the sense that like that has like real world impacts on women that you wouldn't realize otherwise. And so it's like, when you think about it, there's also like the structural bias that exists in the system has real world impact on women. And so when I think about like women in leadership, it's like so important for like, say, people like you in a real successful position to really espouse those virtues and take and indicate to younger women in the industry that like the opportunity is there, that like there are going to be biases, and it's like you need to be aware that they exist, but you can overcome these, and these are the processes, and this is how you can do it, and sort of laying out that map. And it's very clear that you're doing that yourself. So it's like more power to you. It's like you're an unbelievably impressive person is basically what I'm getting at, Cara.
Well, thank you. I'm smiling because you're talking about bathrooms, and I've long held this belief. And I don't spend any time in men's bathrooms when you all are in there. But I've always said to my husband, I'm like, what business goes on in that men's room that doesn't happen within our part? Because I said, there's got to be something. You guys are always coming out smiling, joking, talking about this. And I'm like, what were they saying in there? And what, dadgummit, how do I learn there? So, I will tell you one more quick story. I remember talking to a counterpart of mine years ago, and he had gone to this big women's food service forum. You probably heard about it in the industry, where all the ladies get together, and sometimes male counterparts, male champions will come to it as well. And he said, we were on a panel together, and he said, I walked into, and he was a really confident individual. And he said, I walked into the sea of professional women. There were probably about 1,000 women in business suits. And he said, I immediately became panicked. He said, do you have any idea what that was like for me? And I just looked at him and I said, every single day of my life, I understand that. So it's interesting.
It is. I mean, everyone, it's, in the sense that like, if you think back to your career 20 years ago, 25 years ago, I'm sure you'll say we've come a long way.
Absolutely.
but it's like a lot done, more to do. And I think, the more leaders we have across the board, more people like you in hospitality, more females in leadership in tech, more Sheryl Sandbergs, more of everybody like out there kind of like in key leadership positions and in key middle management positions. This is the thing. And I've become a real fan of like, I guess like my kind of final thought on this, because I feel like I'm kind of riffing off myself here as well. But I feel like, there are a lot more platforms for people to talk about this stuff now. Like, I feel like anybody can like record a reel, go on LinkedIn, write a blog. Kind of, there are so many community groups like in real life, in like in larger corporations, online community groups that people can learn from each other, that can take advice, that can take snippets, that can take action, like within organizations, whether they're corporate environments, whether they're club environments, whether they're whichever, that really can help people kind of thrive. And I feel like, it's great to hear you such as an advocate for this honesty, because like sometimes obviously I think about this because I'm a guy and I'm like in a sort of bias, and my missus herself is in a very male dominated industry, which I won't speak to just to save her, but like I hear the same thing from her all the time, and it's just very interesting for me. And I think the more people hear this and the more like we have this sort of conversation, and actually you're the first person I've had on that's really kind of, we've spoken about this kind of more in depth. And like I was saying, I have a bunch of other fantastic women coming on the podcast now over the next month that we're very much talking about women in leadership and hospitality. And I'm delighted that like you were able to kind of kick off that sort of conversation with me and, give me your sort of point of view and your take on it. I guess we're actually well into time now, by the way. So I guess can you believe we've talked for like the guts of an hour here? The last thing I always ask people, Cara, is like, do you have any advice to give somebody who's listening to this podcast? Now, typically it's people in hospitality. What advice would you give them?
I think just to phrase it up very simply would be the change you want to see. Stop waiting on other people, but be the change you want to see.
Oh, that's so good. It's so refreshing and succinct, which I appreciate so much. Cara Ramirez, thank you so much.
Thank you, Alex.